The email landed in my inbox with the corporate equivalent of a guillotine's thud. Subject: Organizational Realignment Notification. 15 years. 15 years I'd poured into Maxwell Corp, climbing from junior analyst to leading the key project management team for our flagship software suite. I'd bled for that company, missed family dinners, skipped vacations, put out fires lit by incompetent VPs. And it ended with a sterile paragraph about synergies and streamlining, and my position being eliminated, effective immediately. HR drone Lauren, early 30s Fahrenheit, probably hired last year, delivered the final blow via Zoom, her voice radiating the carefully rehearsed empathy that feels like sandpaper on raw nerves. Scott, M38. This wasn't an easy decision, she began. I barely heard the rest. I knew the real reason. My boss, a slick political animal named Carver, had been sidelining me for months after I'd refused to sign off on unrealistic deadlines he'd promised upstairs. He needed a scapegoat when the inevitable delays hit. Now he had one. My severance package was decent, 6 months' pay, but staring at the digital pink slip, it felt less like a cushion and more like the few coins tossed at a beggar. The weight of my mortgage, car payments, and my son Owen's M8 needs pressed down instantly. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I spent the first few days in a daze, updating resumes, firing off applications into the digital void, the rejection emails trickling back like icy water torture. The severance clock was ticking loudly. My savings wouldn't last long. The thought of telling Owen we might have to tighten our belts, maybe even move, made me physically ill. Swallowing pride that tasted like bile, I called my older brother Joshua, M40. Our relationship had always been uneven. He'd been the golden child, effortlessly charming, seemingly successful in his finance job, while I was the steady, quiet grinder. He lived in a sprawling house in the suburbs with his wife, Melissa, F40, the kind of house with a 3-car garage and landscaping that required a professional crew. The phone rang 4 times before he picked up, his voice smooth and slightly impatient. "Scott, everything okay?" The words caught in my throat. "Hey, Joshua, not really. Listen, Maxwell Corp, they, restructured. My position was eliminated. The silence on the other end stretched, thick with something I couldn't quite place. Calculation, maybe? Wow, seriously? That's rough, man, really rough." His sympathy sounded practiced, like Lauren's. Then, the offer came, wrapped in faux generosity. "Look, why don't you come stay here for a bit? We've got that guest house out back. Nobody uses it, just until you get back on your feet, obviously. Give you some breathing room." Relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought tears. "Joshua, thank you. That would be incredible. Are you sure Melissa's okay with it?" Yeah, totally," he breezed. "Melissa thinks it's a great idea. Gives you a chance to focus on the job hunt without worrying about rent. Just pack your stuff, come on over." Hope, fragile but real, flickered within me. Maybe this was what family was for. Maybe this crisis would bring us closer. Maybe Joshua wasn't just the competitive older brother I always perceived him to be. The guest house was detached from the main house, nestled at the back of their meticulously manicured yard. It was nice enough, a small bedroom, bathroom, kitchenette, but furnished with their cast-offs. A lumpy floral couch, a wobbly IKEA table, mismatched lamps. It felt like exactly what it was. A temporary holding cell, clearly scotting my status as the dependent relation. Joshua helped me move a few boxes in, clapping me on the back with performative encouragement. "You'll land something better in no time, Scotty. Just gotta stay positive." Melissa offered a thin smile from the doorway of the main house, her eyes doing a quick, critical sweep of my belongings. "Welcome, Scott," she said, her tone lukewarm. "Let us know if you need, well, anything reasonable." I set up my laptop, printed resumes, and threw myself into the job search with renewed determination. I was determined not to be a burden, keeping the guest house immaculate, staying out of their way, making myself scarce during their family time. I texted Owen goodnight every evening, reassuring him I was fine, just staying with Uncle Joshua for a little while until I found a great new job. The lie felt heavy, but necessary. The first few weeks settled into a tense routine. Then, the shift began. Subtle at first. Joshua started making comments. "Still pounding the pavement, huh?" He'd ask breezily over coffee I'd brewed in the guest house because using their fancy machine felt like an imposition. "Scott, it's tough out there, especially for, well, middle management." The unspoken criticism hung in the air. Then came the chores. It started innocuously. "Hey, Scott, while you're not busy, could you grab the bins from the curb?" Soon it was. "The lawn needs mowing. Got some time this afternoon?" Then, "Melissa's car is filthy. Wouldn't mind giving it a wash, would you?" It was always phrased as a casual request, implying my time was worthless compared to theirs. I found myself spending hours doing unpaid yard work on their acre lot, meticulously cleaning their luxury SUVs, running errands for Melissa, who always seemed too swamped with her book club or tennis lessons. It was humiliating, performing manual labor while my brother relaxed on his patio, scrolling through his phone, occasionally offering pointless advice about my job search. But I needed the place to stay. I swallowed my pride and did as asked, feeling smaller with each task. The final blow to my dwindling savings came about a month in. Joshua approached me one evening, feigning awkwardness. "Hey, Scott, Melissa and I were looking at the bills. You know, with you using the electricity and water out back, utilities have just skyrocketed and property taxes aren't cheap, you know." He shifted his weight. "We were thinking, just to make things fair, maybe you could chip in, say, $300 a month, just towards costs." $300? My internal calculator screamed. The guest house was tiny. There was no way I was using that much in utilities. But what could I say? I mumbled an agreement. The very next month, he brought it up again. Actually, Scott looked closer at the bills. With summer coming, AC costs, probably more like $800 would cover it. $800. It was blatant exploitation. Nearly half my monthly severance payment, gone. To live in their cast-off furniture and mow their damn lawn. His justification was flimsy, bordering on insulting. "It's still way cheaper than renting your own place, right? Helping you out here." His eyes held a challenge, knowing I was trapped. I nodded numbly, the resentment churning like acid in my stomach. I started keeping a hidden file on my laptop, documenting every chore demanded, every dollar extracted, every stinging comment. A cold, methodical part of me was taking notes. The passive aggression soon bled into outright cruelty. Joshua seemed to take a perverse pleasure in highlighting my dependency. If friends came over, he'd introduce me with a pitying tone. "This is my brother Scott, staying with us for a bit while he figures things out." He'd make loud comments about his stressful job while I was clearing their dinner plates, implying my job search was a vacation. One evening, he came back from a work dinner, slightly drunk and expansive. He saw me working on my laptop at the wobbly IKEA table. "Still playing on the computer, Scotty?" He slurred, leaning in the doorway. "Should probably face facts, man. Not everyone's cut out for the big leagues. Maybe look into something simpler. Driving Uber? Plenty of opportunities there for guys like, well, you know." He chuckled, clearly pleased with himself. Melissa, standing behind him, just rolled her eyes, not in defense of me, but in annoyance at Joshua's volume. It felt like being kicked when I was already down. The dismissal casual and absolute, from my own brother. The documented insults file grew longer. I started overhearing snippets of conversation from the main house, Joshua complaining about the burden, Melissa agreeing wholeheartedly, their voices laced with disdain. The breaking point wasn't one single event, but a rapid-fire sequence of betrayals that finally shattered the lock on my tightly controlled composure. It started at their annual 4th of July BBQ. The yard was full of Joshua and Melissa's friends, smug couples comparing portfolio gains and vacation destinations. Joshua, beer in hand, was holding court by the grill. He spotted me sitting alone at a picnic table nursing a soda. He grinned, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "Hey everyone, raise a glass to my brother Scott. Living proof that family charity keeps people off the streets. Good thing he's got me, eh? Otherwise he'd be enjoying the fireworks from under that highway overpass downtown." "Ha ha." A wave of forced laughter rippled through the crowd. People glanced at me with awkward pity. My face felt like it was on fire. I wanted the ground to swallow me. I mumbled an excuse about needing water and retreated into the guest house, shaking with impotent fury. The air was thick with tension for days. Then came the argument. It started over something trivial. I'd forgotten to put the lid back on their recycling, and a raccoon had scattered trash across the pristine lawn. Joshua launched into a tirade, not just about the bin, but about my general incompetence, my situation, my lack of prospect. His face was puce, spittle flying, and then he delivered the blow that struck deeper than any personal insult. "You know," he spat, his voice dripping with, "maybe if you weren't such a damn failure sponging off us, your son Owen could actually afford those decent coding classes he wants. Instead, he's probably stressed out wondering if his loser dad's going to end up homeless." Owen, he brought my son into, he used my deepest vulnerability, my love and responsibility, as a weapon. Something cold and hard snapped inside me then. The humiliation, the chores, I could almost swallow that. But targeting my son? Unforgivable. I needed air. I stormed out of the main house, heading towards the back gate, needing to walk, to think, to breathe air that wasn't tainted, poisonous presence. As I passed the screened-in porch, I heard their voices, low but clear through the... "Joshua." "What?" Just his sobs. "Relax, another month or two his severance has got..." He admitted it wasn't that much. Then we tell him to find your own damn. Can't afford him dragging down our club membership. Melissa's sharp reply. Good. Honestly, tired of seeing his mopey. He brings the whole mood down. Did you see him sulking at the BBQ? There it was. The final, ugly truth. It wasn't charity. It was temporary tolerance with a definite expiration date served with a side of contempt. Any lingering flicker of hope that Joshua cared, that family meant something, was extinguished, replaced by ice. In that moment, the objective clarified. I wasn't just going to survive this. I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to dismantle Joshua's carefully constructed life, brick by painstaking brick. He saw me as a leech? Fine. I'd become something far worse. A parasite that hollows out its host from the inside. That night I didn't sleep. My laptop became my command center. The resentment that had been simmering now fueled a laser-focused obsession. I remembered Joshua occasionally complaining about being house poor despite his income. I started digging, public county assessor records online, property deeds, tax assessments. Then, more carefully, searching social media for clues. Geotagged posts hinting at expensive vacations, comments boasting about investments. I listened intently whenever Joshua took work calls on speakerphone on the patio, catching fragments about Scottish volatility, refinancing deadlines. I even carefully retrieved a discarded pre-approved credit card offer from his recycling bin one evening, noting the estimated credit score range and debt ratios. The picture emerged slowly but surely. Joshua was leveraged to the hilt. A huge primary mortgage, yes, but also a substantial home equity line of credit, HELOC, he'd likely used for renovations or those fancy trips. He projected wealth, but the foundation was shaky, vulnerable. My severance, though dwindling from his extortionate rent, was still a weapon if used precisely. I started researching differently. Not job sites, but niche financial forums. Distressed debt investment, mortgage servicing rights, predatory lending loopholes, not to use them, but to understand them. The plan coalesced. Cold, complex, and utterly ruthless. 2 weeks later, while Joshua and Melissa were away for a weekend wine-tasting trip paid for, no doubt, by my rentee, I executed my exit strategy. I found a small furnished room for rent above a shop in a nondescript part of town. Cheap, anonymous. I packed my few belongings methodically. My clothes, my laptop, the hidden file documenting Joshua's abuse, and the crucial financial research I'd gathered. I scrubbed the guest house until it gleamed, cleaner than it had ever been under their ownership. A final, silent act of defiance. On the spotless kitchenette counter, I left a single plain white envelope. Inside, a simple note typed on my laptop and printed out, "Thank you for your hospitality." Driving away from that manicured suburban prison, I didn't feel sad or angry anymore. Just cold, resolved, liberated. My first call wasn't to a recruiter. It was to schedule a consultation with Bedrock Capital Advisors, a boutique investment firm I'd found online, known in certain circles for being discreet, aggressive, and specializing in exactly the kind of debt instruments Joshua was drowning in. The meeting took place in a bland office building downtown. A partner named Sinclair, $50,000, with eyes like chips of granite, listened impassively as I laid out my research on Joshua's finances and, crucially, presented my proposal, using a significant chunk of my remaining severance as capital for Bedrock to acquire Joshua's HELOC debt. I wasn't asking for a handout. I was offering them a partnership, a targeted investment with guaranteed leverage. Sinclair didn't smile, but I saw a flicker of predatory interest. He recognized the potential for profit. We discussed terms, ironed out the legal framework, ensuring my anonymity behind Bedrock's corporate sheet. I signed the agreement, transferring the funds. It felt like signing a pact, crossing a line from which there was no return. Weeks passed. I settled into my Spartan room, found a temp project management gig to stop the financial bleeding, and waited. I focused on Owen, driving across town to see him whenever I could, trying to shield him from the ugliness. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, I received a coded email from Sinclair at Bedrock Capital. Subject, asset secured. Body, transaction finalized. Target debt successfully acquired from originating institution. The first piece was in place. Bedrock now owned Joshua's HELOC. A few days later, Sinclair sent another brief message. Initial contact initiated. Certified mail delivered and signed for today. I closed my eyes, imagining the scene. Joshua arriving home from his important job, sorting through the mail, finding the official-looking envelope with the unfamiliar, imposing letterhead, Bedrock Capital Advisors, tearing it open, reading the cold, legalistic jargon informing him that the servicing and ownership of his significant HELOC had been transferred. Perhaps a clause about stricter enforcement of terms highlighted for effect. I imagined his reaction. Confusion, then annoyance. A rant to Melissa about incompetent banks. A blustering phone call to the original lender getting stonewalled, complaining to his buddies about red tape, but critically, not yet connecting it to the brother he'd kicked out and called a leech. not yet understanding the ground had just silently vanished beneath his feet. A grim, chilling satisfaction settled over me. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't joy. It was the quiet hum of a complex machine starting its inexorable work. The first domino had fallen, and Joshua, in his smug arrogance, hadn't even heard it land. Phase 1 was complete. The real pain was yet to begin. The initial notice from Bedrock Capital was just the opening salvo. Sinclair and his team, fueled by my capital and guided by my intimate knowledge of Joshua's precarious finances and arrogant personality, began tightening the screws with chilling efficiency. The flimsy HELOC agreement Joshua had likely signed without reading closely became their finely honed weapon. First came the late fee notices. Joshua, accustomed perhaps to a grace period or polite reminders from his previous lender, probably paid a day or two late on the first payment due to Bedrock. The penalty wasn't just applied, it was compounded daily, retroactively, according to some obscure clause. The amount was jarringly significant. Phone calls from Bedrock's servicing department were relentless, automated and utterly devoid of human flexibility. Voicemails piled up, each one colder and more demanding than the last. Then came the property inspection demands. Citing vague covenant clauses about maintaining the asset's value, Bedrock insisted on frequent inspections of the entire property, both the main house and the guest house, at highly inconvenient times. Joshua would have to rearrange his schedule to accommodate inspectors who scrutinized every minor flaw. A loose shingle here, a crack in the driveway there, documenting everything meticulously. Each inspection report likely resulted in a follow-up letter demanding immediate repairs to trivial items, citing potential devaluation that could trigger acceleration of the loan. Joshua, already bleeding money from the inflated HELOC payments and punitive fees, was being forced into costly, unnecessary maintenance. I learned about this escalation through terse email updates from Sinclair. Inspection scheduled. Notice of minor deficiency sent. Late fee applied. Each message was a tiny jolt of cold vindication. I imagined Joshua's frustration mounting, his carefully curated world fraying at the edges. The guest house, the place he'd used to humiliate me, was now a tool being used against him. The strain started showing. I didn't see Joshua or Melissa regularly, of course, but whispers travel in families, even fractured ones. My mother, bless her attempts at neutrality, would occasionally call, her voice laced with worry. "Joshua sounds stressed, Scott. He mentioned some trouble with a new finance company." I offered vague sympathy, careful not to reveal anything. "Loan companies can be vultures, Mom. Hope he sorts it out." Then, the first direct confirmation of Joshua's crumbling facade came from an unexpected source, a mutual acquaintance. Craig bumped into me at a coffee shop. After some awkward small talk, Craig leaned in conspiratorially. "Dude, what's going on with your brother? Saw him the other day, looked like hell. Snapped at his wife right in the grocery store aisle over the price of organic kale. Something about needing to cut back because of some predatory loan sharks." Craig shook his head. Never seen him like that. So, the cracks were showing. The pressure was working. Melissa, whose comfort and social standing likely depended heavily on Joshua's financial performance, was feeling the heat, too. The organic kale incident was telling. The illusion of effortless affluence was dissolving under real financial stress. It was around this time, about 4 months after I'd left, that the suspicion must have fully crystallized in Joshua's mind. Maybe it was the relentless, targeted nature of Bedrock's attacks. Maybe it was the timing coinciding too perfectly with my departure. Maybe it was just the universe balancing the scales in a way his ego couldn't comprehend, unless there was a personal hand involved. The confrontation came abruptly. I was leaving my temp job one rainy Tuesday evening, heading towards my beat-up sedan, when a familiar luxury SUV swerved into the parking lot, blocking me in. Joshua flung the door open, his face a mask of fury, rain plastering his thinning hair to his scalp. He looked older, harried, his usual smugness replaced with a raw, ragged anger. "Scott, what the hell did you do?" he snarled, stalking towards me. I deliberately took a slow breath, leaning against my car, forcing calm into my voice. "Joshua, what are you talking about? You shouldn't be here. Don't play dumb with me." He jabbed a finger towards me, his voice rising. "This Bedrock Capital crap. This started right after you left, paying off loan sharks to come after your own brother? What kind of sick bastard are you?" I raised an eyebrow, feigning bewildered innocence. "Bedrock Capital? Sounds vaguely familiar. Didn't Mom mention you were having some issues?" "Look, Joshua, debt collectors are rough. Everyone knows that. Predatory lending is a real problem." I infused my tone with just the right amount of detached sympathy. "I really hope you sort it out. Financial stress is tough." My calmness seemed to infuriate him further. "You slimy little snake. You think I don't see it? Living in your little rat hole? He gestured vaguely at the modest office park. Planning this whole thing. You were always jealous. Jealous? I allowed a small, humorless chuckle. Joshua, I'm trying to rebuild my life after losing my job. Your financial choices aren't exactly my top priority. I met his furious gaze steadily. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get going. And maybe you should calm down before you give yourself a stroke. He looked like he wanted to hit me. His fists clenched, his jaw worked. For a moment, I thought he might actually swing, but then something seemed to deflate in him, replaced by a look of utter, sputtering helplessness. He knew, or at least strongly suspected, but he had no proof. My calm denial, my refusal to engage on his terms, left him nowhere to go. He glared at me, spat on the pavement near my feet, then stormed back to his SUV and tore out of the parking lot, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. Driving back to my room, my hands were trembling slightly, but not from fear. It was adrenaline and the cold, satisfying confirmation that I was inside his head. He suspected. He was hurting. Good. The next escalation wasn't directly from me, but a consequence of his own uncontrolled anger. A few days later, I came out to my car after work to find a long, jagged key scratch running the entire length of the driver's side. Deep, deliberate, malicious. There was no proof it was Joshua, of course, but I knew. It was petty, impulsive, a pathetic lashing out. I didn't get angry. I calmly took photos, documented the time and location, and filed a police report for vandalism. Just another piece of documentation. Another potential leverage point, if needed. It showed his desperation, his lack of control. While Joshua was flailing, I was planning my next move with Sinclair. It was time to broaden the attack, to target the source of his income and his inflated sense of professional status. Joshua worked in financial planning, a field where personal financial stability and judgment are paramount. Working through a third-party contact provided by Bedrock, we arranged for an anonymous letter of concern to be sent to both the compliance department of Joshua's large firm and the state's financial regulatory body that issued his license. The letter was carefully worded, avoiding direct accusations but highlighting publicly available information, the multiple mortgages, the HELOC now serviced by an aggressive investment firm, Bedrock, the recent police report for vandalism potentially linked to financial stress, and raising questions about whether someone under such significant financial duress could provide unbiased advice or exercise sound judgment with client funds. It was subtle, based on verifiable facts, but planted a serious seed of doubt. This move was colder, more calculated. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about striking at the core of his professional identity, the very foundation of the success he lorded over me. The potential consequences were severe. Suspension, investigation, loss of license, termination. The fallout from this wasn't immediate, but Sinclair received word through industry back channels that an internal review had been opened at Joshua's firm. The pressure on Joshua must have become unbearable. The next time Mom called, her voice was strained, thick with unshed tears. Scott. Joshua lost his job. They let him go. Something about an internal review? He's devastated. And Melissa, Scott, she left him, packed her bags and went to stay with her sister. There it was, the complete implosion. Loss of job, loss of wife, on top of the crushing debt. Part of me, the brother I used to be, felt a fleeting flicker of something like pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of his cruelty, his smug exploitation, his targeting of my son. This wasn't just karma. This was a meticulously engineered consequence. He had sown the wind. He was reaping the whirlwind I had directed. With Joshua unemployed and Melissa gone, his ability to fight Bedrock evaporated completely. He missed payments entirely now. He desperately tried to sell the house, but the combination of the outstanding debt, the HELOC complications managed by Bedrock, potential liens from the property inspections, and possibly the cloud from the professional inquiry made it impossible to sell quickly or for a price that would cover his obligations. He was trapped. Sinclair contacted me. Subject is non-performing. All attempts at resolution have failed. Initiating final asset recovery protocol. Bedrock Capital moved swiftly. Foreclosure proceedings were initiated on the HELOC. Given Joshua's lack of resources to fight it legally and the ironclad case Bedrock had built, thanks to his defaults and the meticulously enforced terms, the outcome was inevitable. The house, the symbol of Joshua's supposed success in the prison where he'd humiliated me, went to auction. Bedrock, as the primary line holder on the HELOC, placed the winning bid, effectively taking ownership for the value of the outstanding debt. A few weeks later, Joshua received his final notice. Not from Bedrock Capital this time. The official eviction papers, taped to the front door of the house he no longer owned, came from a different entity, Apex Holdings Property Management. The letterhead was stark, minimalist, professional. The eviction date was firm, non-negotiable. Local sheriff details were included for enforcement. I drove by the house on eviction day, not to gloat overtly, but to witness the final act. I parked down the street, watching from a distance. Movers were haphazardly loading boxes, what few possessions Joshua had left, or could afford to move, onto a small rented U-Haul truck. Joshua stood on the curb, looking gaunt, defeated, a ghost haunting his former life. He didn't look like the smug, confident brother who'd charged me rent for a guest house. He looked broken. Later that day, after the truck had gone, after the locks were changed by an Apex Holdings representative, I walked up the driveway. The house felt empty, hollowed out. Using the key provided by the Apex agent, I let myself in. It smelled faintly of Joshua's expensive cologne, a final phantom trace. I walked through the rooms, the living room where he'd held court, the kitchen where Melissa had judged me, the porch where I'd overheard their final betrayal. Then I went to the spot near the back door where he used to leave reminders about Theron's money. I took out a plain white envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper, identical to the one I'd left in the guest house months ago. Typed on it were the same 5 words: "Thank you for your hospitality." Below the text, subtly placed, was the minimalist, sharp logo of Apex Holdings. I left the envelope propped against the wall, where he couldn't miss it if he ever dared to trespass, to peer through the windows of his lost kingdom. The message was clear. The LEECH now owned the pond. My control of the house, via the shell corporation Apex Holdings set up by Sinclair, was absolute. I had options. Rent it out for Scott at value, generating passive income. Sell it immediately, pocketing the difference between the debt Bedrock acquired it for and the actual Scott at value. A substantial profit built on Joshua's ruin. Or, the coldest option, leave it empty for a while. A silent monument to his downfall just sitting there in the manicured neighborhood he cared so much about. I decided to hire Apex to manage it as a rental property. Impersonally, efficiently. Let it be just another asset in the portfolio. Joshua's ruin was complete. Jobless, divorced, broke, evicted. I heard through Mom he ended up moving back into our parents' basement. The ultimate humiliation for someone who projected such success. Our parents, finally confronted with the full scope of Joshua's financial irresponsibility and perhaps suspecting the truth about his earlier treatment of me, were strained but provided him shelter. My relationship with them remained distant but civil. They knew better than to plead Joshua's case to me. Did I feel remorse? Sometimes, late at night, a sliver of guilt would try to surface, the ghost of familial obligation whispering about mercy. But then I remembered the calculated cruelty, the exploitation, when I was at my most vulnerable, the insult aimed at my son. This wasn't just revenge, it was cauterizing a wound. It was excising a toxic presence from my life using the only language Joshua understood, power and money. The satisfaction wasn't joyful, it was cold, hard, and absolute. It was the feeling of a complex equation finally definitively solved. I focused on my own life. The temp gig turned into a permanent, better-paying position at a new company that valued my experience. I found a decent apartment closer to Owen's school. I spent weekends with my son, making up for lost time, showing him stability, resilience, and the quiet strength of rebuilding. One afternoon, while helping Owen build a ridiculously complex Lego castle, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. A hesitant, broken voice on the other end. "Scott, it's Joshua." Silence stretched. "Scott, please." His voice cracked. I know it was you. Apex Holdings. The note. Please, can we just talk?" I looked at the Lego castle Owen was constructing, focused and happy. I thought about the guest house, the smug demands, the crippling rent, the joke at the BBQ, the insult to my son, the overheard betrayal. I thought about the cold satisfaction of watching his life unravel as a direct consequence of his own actions I merely capitalized on. Taking a calm breath, mirroring the control I'd learned under his roof, I replied simply, "I don't think we have anything left to talk about, Joshua." Then I hung up and blocked the number. The chapter was closed. The debt was paid, in full. That's all for this story. I'll be back with another one. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It motivates me to create more content like this.